Dr. Karan Singh, Professor Manoj, members of the Governing Board, members of the International Advisory Council, Mr. Balabhaskar, Secretary of the Auroville Foundation, fellow Aurovillians, dear friends, welcome to the Bharat Nivas, welcome to the auditorium for this talk by Dr. Karan Singh on Vedanta Today. We thank Dr. Karan Singh for giving us a talk tonight on this subject, and I would request Professor Manoj to say a few words, if you please.
Dr. Karan Singh ji, celebrities who have come from outside, members of the Governing Body and International Council, and fellow seekers and friends. Well, it should be in fitness of things that the President should speak at the end of the talk. But our experience shows that once Dr. Karan Singh ji had concluded his talk, the audience needs an inner silence for some time. I am yet to come across a president who can improve upon that silence. Hence, whatever I have to say, I assure you it won't be long. I will say at the beginning. Well, the subject is Vedanta, and the speaker is Dr. Karan Singh. He will introduce the subject Vedanta, and he needs no introduction. So this is a reasonably safe strategy for me to escape. And you all will appreciate it, including myself, because you have come here to listen to him. But when I say he is well known, I have a little rider to it which comes to my mind. How much do we know him? Yes, I know him actually as a Yuvraj of the legendary Kashmir, President Sadar Liaquat, Governor, the youngest cabinet minister at the center, the first and the only prince to have surrendered the handsome privy purse and whatever he had received to make a charitable trust out of it. Nobody else has done it. Bharat Indian royalty, the solitary example of the kind. We know all these things, but for me, believe me, he has been the practical demonstration of a certain theory. I knew the theory, but I did not know. I had not got a proof of its clear justification of the theory. I believe in 1963, I joined the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. If I am not mistaken, the same year, Dr. Saab's thesis, Prophet of Indian Nationalism, Sri Aurobindo, was published, I think by George Arnano, in very prestigious publishers in those days in London. Of course, the Indian edition followed immediately. I happened to be one of the first readers of the book. I do not know how. The coincidence was that one of the few copies which had floated by that time, one of the few copies reached my hand. With great curiosity, I read it. My curiosity turned into amazement when I came to the end of the book. Academically, factually, rich in novelty, interpretation, the last few passages of the book vibrated with a kind of inner love for the subject, Sri Aurobindo, which amazed me. I repeat, amazed me. Those of you who know the backdrop will not be amazed with my amazement. You see, he is the scion of the most illustrious royal family of the subcontinent. If you know the relationship which Maharajas had with the British government, colonial government, you will understand they are great friends and the freedom fighters are their enemies. And most and of all, the freedom fighters of the first decade of the century, led by Sri Aurobindo, arch enemy. In fact, one of the big Maharajas of those days has told the Governor General of India, give me power for one day. Among the things I would do is to deport a man like Mr. Auroville Ghosh. And he came from that class. What demonstrated to me in my present surprise was this. The theory is that there are always exceptional individuals, evolved ones, the evolution, individual evolution going back to several past incarnations, who are never influenced by their environment, never dominated by their lineage, their traditions, and all that. He was the demonstration that he could rise over the environment, over the atmosphere of the time, and he could choose for his subject, unbelievably, Sri Aurobindo, the revolutionary. Now, his article, in 1971, on the 2001, on the occasion of his 75th birth anniversary, some of his admirers compiled a very beautiful book, The Earth Has No Corners. Many big people have contributed to it, and there is one no big man, myself. I have reviewed his autobiography there. A few copies, a friend today xeroxed, and they are with our friend Mr. Srinivasa Murthy. Those of you who are interested, they can have that copy. What I am saying, that will be more elaborately told there. Now, the subject is Vedanta today, not Vedanta in general. I wonder, what was the date of that glorious yesterday when the Vedanta was born or revealed? The backdrop of Vedanta are the Vedas. What is the time when the Vedas were written? Well, the traditional Western theories got a jolt when Bal Gangadhar Tilak came out with his theory that the Vedas were composed 6,000 years ago. He came to the conclusion by a study of the constellatory situation. Madame Blavatsky, the occultist and the famous founder of Theosophical movement, she came with a greater jolt that this constellatory situation repeats itself every 6,000 years. So how can you say they were written only 6,000 years ago? Why not 6 million years ago? Now, I do not know. I have yet to get an answer to this question, but my question is, you see, if the maturity of a language can be evidenced by the profundity of its capacity to express great things in a few words, there is no rival to the Rig-Vedic Sanskrit. But for such a language to come to that kind of point of maturity, a great civilization and culture must support it. Where is the history of that civilization and that culture? I am bewildered, I don't know. I will just conclude with a small anecdote which I have narrated in one of my books called My Little India, which will explain the place of Vedanta unconsciously, which it finds, it is there in the Indian consciousness. The author is traveling from Varanasi to New Delhi. Non-air conditioned railway days, and there is a big first class compartment. Apart from me, there are a small group of European travelers, 3 or 4, and with an Indian guide. So the Indian guide is giving the fantastic account of Indian culture and everything. And one of they're Europeans, not English or British, American. They are struggling to speak English. Very fascinating. And one of them asks, why did Buddhism disappear? They just come from Sarnath. Why did Buddhism disappear from India? And prompt came the reply from the guide. You see, the Brahmins took hold of their forelocks and kicked them out of their localities. I was tolerating till then, and then I laughed a little bit. The senior most member of the group asked me, why did you laugh? I did not want to tell. But when he insisted, I told him that the vision of Brahmins trying to catch hold of the forelocks of the Buddhists, because Buddhists were clean-shaven monks, it must have been a very difficult task for them. That visualized thing came to my mind and I was laughing. Then why did Buddhism disappear? I told them in a brief, it has not disappeared. It became a part of the great assortment, the mega bouquet that goes by the name of Hinduism. The Buddha was given credit as an avatar, but the Indian psyche, which is Vedantic, which believes that entire existence, at the root of the existence lies delight, was not prepared to, for long, tolerate a doctrine which said that the whole life is a pack of sorrows. And that must have been the reason for the, you can say, disappearance of Buddhism. But I must stop now. I invite Dr. Karan Singh ji to present, his love of Sri Aurobindo's poem, who explains as an introduction his love for Vedanta and his deep study of the Vedanta. I know how deep the study is, deep at the same time. He presents the depth with extraordinary simplicity. Dr. Karan Singh ji.
Thank you, Manoj, for that very generous introduction. Fellow Aurovillians, fellow travelers on the spiritual path, we live in an age of great tension and turmoil, when the old is collapsing and the new is struggling to be born. And we often find ourselves precariously poised between a disappearing past and an indeterminate future. At a time like this, there is a great quest for new certitudes. As I travel around the world, meeting with people from different walks of life, students, academicians, and so on, I find everywhere there's a craving for certainty, there's a craving for the light. And it is a time when we look back into our scriptures, not in order to go backwards in time. There can be no going backwards in time. The arrow of time, as Stephen Hawking says, goes only in one direction. But in order to see whether from our scriptures we can absorb the courage, the compassion, the wisdom to deal boldly with the problems that we face today. Because any scripture is relevant only to the extent that it helps us today and tomorrow. Otherwise, it's all right for research scholars and for academicians. But it has no immediacy. A philosophy, a scripture, a structure of thought to have significance today has to be something which is of relevance today. And as we look back into our scriptures, in Hinduism particularly, the religion that I know best, we have a huge corpus of literature, quite astounding the breadth and the amount of literature, scriptural literature that there is in India, in Hinduism. We have the Vedas, first of all, which are those sublime utterances. Whenever they were uttered, they have an immortal ring to them. We have then the Aranyakas, the Brahmanas, the Upanishads, about which I'm going to talk. Then we have the Puranas, then we have the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata itself is so huge that both the Iliad and the Odyssey will come fit into it comfortably with lots of space to spare. So we have this huge corpus, but to my mind, the predominant scriptures of India are the Upanishads. The Upanishads are known as the Vedanta for two reasons. Firstly, because they come at the end of the Vedic collections. The Vedas, as you know, are a collection of these sublime utterances and hymns of the realized rishis. And at the end of those collections, they are the Vedas, they are the Brahmanas, they are the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads are at the end of the Vedas, hence the Vedanta. Secondly, because they really represent the high watermark of Vedic philosophy. In fact, I think one of the high watermarks of world philosophy. And that is why the Upanishads are looked upon as the most important texts in Hinduism. Now there's a tradition that there were many Upanishads, 101 at one stage, but there are 11 major Upanishads upon which Adi Shankaracharya has written his commentaries that have come down to us the present day, and lots of other subsidiary ones. The Upanishads The word Upanishad again has two meanings. You must remember in Sanskrit, a word can have and often does have more than one meaning. Now the Upanishad has two meanings. One meaning is a secret doctrine. In other words, a doctrine that should be imparted only to those who are capable of absorbing it and not just spread around. The other meaning is to sit nearby, Upanishad. The Guru sits, one or three or four disciples sit around them, and there is a dialogue. Please remember, the Indic religions, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, are dialogic religions. They are based upon dialogues. The whole of the Upanishadic corpus are dialogues. The Gita is a dialogue. Mahavira in the Jain tradition was constantly talking. The Buddha was constantly answering questions from his disciples. So we are a dialogic civilization. Unlike the Abrahamic religions, which are revelatory civilizations. There's a revelation. There are the commandments, or there's a Quran Sharif, or there's the Testament, and it's there. And then you do whatever you can interpret it in one way, but you cannot question. Whereas the Indic civilizations are based essentially upon sharp questions and answers to them. So that gives it a sort of an immediacy, which becomes very contemporary. The closest parallel in the West would be the Socratic dialogues, except that there you had only one guru, Socrates, and several disciples, whereas in the Upanishads you have different gurus in different circumstances. So in these dialogues, they are brilliant and inspiring dialogues. They ask the fundamental questions. Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? Who is it that impels us to move? What is the power that moves this entire universe? The mystery of life, the mystery of existence, the mystery of consciousness. Those are the sort of questions with which the Upanishad deals. Now, in my view, many of the concepts of the Upanishads are becoming increasingly relevant as we move into the global society. It's quite astounding. We moved into the global society more or less in our own lifetimes. And I find that some of the fundamental teachings of the Upanishads, or flowing from the Upanishads, are becoming increasingly relevant. A lot of people think that much traditional religion is become irrelevant, and in fact a lot of it has been discarded, both in the West and in the East. But the Upanishads, I think, have that extraordinary quality of immediacy and of universality. Now it becomes very difficult to sum up the Upanishads in a short period of time. What I will try and do today is to place before you 6 seminal concepts that I would say are at the heart of the Upanishadic tradition. The first concept, which you have to understand, is the concept of the unity of all existence. Isha vasyamidam sarvam yatkit jagatyami. Whatever exists, whatever has existed, whatever will exist, is permeated by, is illuminated by, is inhabited by the same divine power. Ultimately, if there was a Big Bang, it was not only an explosion of light, not only an explosion of energy, but an explosion of consciousness. And it is that divine power that permeates this entire universe. That is known as the Brahman. Please remember, for those who are not familiar, not to be confused either with Brahma, who is one of the Trinity, or with Brahman, who is a caste. The Brahman is the all-pervasive power that pervades this magnificent universe. Vishwamidam Varishtham. And as Manoj says, to say that this universe is Maya, or that this universe is unreal, or it is futile, that would be, I think, absolutely outrageous. The Upanishads are life-affirming. They are not life-negating at all. So the first concept of the Upanishads to grasp is the all-pervasiveness of the divine. There are many shlokas, I won't quote too many. Brahmevidam amritam purastad brahma pashtad brahma dakshinaschottaren adasyorham japrasritam brahmevidam vishwamidam varishtam. Whatever is there is the Brahman. It moves, it does not move. It is far, it is near. It is everything. And it is permeating the entire universe. That is the first concept, the concept of the all-pervasive Brahman. The second basic concept of the Vedanta is the reflection or the spark or as it were, the reflection of that Brahman in each human being. And that is known as the Atman. The Atman is what in the West might perhaps be called the soul, although there's a slightly different nuance to the words. But nonetheless, the closest you could say is perhaps the soul. So you have the all-pervasive Brahman, and you have the Atman in all human beings. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hrideshe tishtati. The Lord resides in the heart of all human beings, regardless of race, of caste, of culture, or nationality, or gender, or anything else. And that spark within us, that is what makes the human being such an extraordinarily receptive and gives it such a lot of opportunities for growth, as Sri Aurobindo is constantly stressing. And fanning that spark of the divine within us into the blazing fire of spiritual realization is the real task of the sadhana of our life. It's our life work. So these two concepts, first of all, have to be clearly understood, the all-pervasive Brahman and the Atman within. And then the importance of joining them. The yoga, the word yoga comes from the same root as the English word to yoke, to join. Yoga is the philosophy and technology of joining the Atman and the Brahman. Because if the Brahman is out there and the Atman is here, then what is the link? We feel they can be joined, they have to be joined. Joining them is in fact our greater task. And there are four main parts of yoga in our tradition. There's the Jnana Yoga, the way of the mind, the way of reflection on reality and unreality. Let us say in the West, the way of Plato. You will recall Plato has this image that we are all in a cave and all we see are shadows thrown on the wall of the cave. We see neither the objects nor the light behind the objects. We only see the shadows. So the Platonic dialogues are the closest that we have to the Jnana Yoga. The Jnana Yoga is reading the text, trying to understand, trying to clarify the mind, trying to clear away all the noise and the bustle and the constant clamor of the outer world, and getting the mind to be clear and focused on the divine. That is the Jnana Yoga, an important path of the yoga. The second path is the Bhakti Yoga. That's the path of love, the path of devotion. If the Jnana Yoga is the way of the mind, Bhakti Yoga is the way of the heart. The heart has to open in love and surrender to the divine. You have this in all the traditions. You have St. Francis of Assisi, and St. Teresa of Avila. You have the great South Indian Nayanmars and Alvars. You have the whole Bhakti movement, Surdas, Tulsidas, Mirabai. You have in every religion the great Bhaktas, the great devotees. Because unless the heart chakra opens in love and adoration, you will not be able to access one very important facet of the divine. And therefore, the path of Bhakti Yoga is a very significant path in all the traditions of the world, particularly in Hinduism. The third path is Karma Yoga, the way of the arms. Jnana Yoga, the way of the mind; Bhakti Yoga, the way of the heart; Karma Yoga, the way of the arms, the way of work. But not just any work. It has to be work dedicated to the divine. If you dedicate your work, and this is something that is found in the Upanishads, but is also specially accentuated in the Gita, that works dedicated to the divine can themselves become a powerful instrument for spiritual realization. For example, the building of the Matri Mandir, I think, was the most extraordinary example of Karma Yoga, of how the Aurovillians toiled day and night to build one of the most beautiful structures in the world. Now the Karma Yoga is work. For example, I am a Shiva Bhakta. Yat yat karma karomi tat tat akhilam shambho davarāvana. Whatever I do, I try and dedicate to Shiva, including this lecture. So the way of dedicated works is also a very important part of the yoga. And the fourth major, of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of bypaths and different lanes. I'm talking of the four major highways: the Jnana Yoga, the Bhakti Yoga, the Karma Yoga, and the Raj Yoga. The Raj Yoga is the way of psycho-spiritual practices, the way of pranayama, of trying to arouse the powers that are within us. The Raj Yoga, the royal way. What we see, what is known as yoga popularly in the West and even in India, is just one small part of the Raj Yoga, the Hatha Yoga, the exercises. I mean, they're very good for you if you can do them. But I don't think that the capacity to stand on your head is a conditioned precedent for illumination. The Raj Yoga revolves around a lot of different theories. One of them is that coiled 3.5 times around the base of the spine is a power known as the Kundalini, the serpent power, which can, under certain circumstances, be aroused. And when it is aroused, it moves up the spine. And as it moves up, it energizes the chakras in the various places along the spine until it pours in bliss and glory into the brain. That's one of the paths, the Kundalini Yoga. There are many ways. There are many ways of breathing. There are many ways of other practices. But Raja Yoga is also, you have that in the West also. In the West, as I said, you have, for example, in Karma Yoga, I'd like to say that the West was the way of Martha rather than the way of Mary. Mary was the way of adoration, the Bhakti Yoga. The way of Martha was the way of good works, of healing the sick, of Mother Teresa, of the Ramakrishna Mission. And similarly, you have the European mystics. You have Hermes Trismegistus, you have Master Eckhart, you have Ruysbrook, we have the great mystics who also had these sort of experiences, although they might have been expressed in a different idiom than has been expressed. Now, for all of these four ways of yoga, there are special texts. There are the Upanishads for the Jnana Yoga, there are the Puranas for the Bhakti Yoga, there is the Karma Kanda for the Karma Yoga, and there are Patanjali's Yoga Sutras for the Raj Yoga. But these are all four major parts of the yoga. And one thing which has to be stressed is, as Sri Aurobindo always did, that these parts are not mutually exclusive. In fact, he talked of an integral yoga. That is a yoga that brings together these four traditional parts, as it were, in a single major thrust to break through the barriers of ignorance and darkness around us and move into the light. So this concept, the all-pervasive Brahman, the Atman within each human being, and the fourfold path of yoga, which is joining the two. These are the first three concepts that I would like to place before you. And we find here that yoga, therefore, the Vedanta addresses the intellectual, the emotional, the physical, and the psychic elements in the human being. In other words, it addresses the entire gamut of consciousness, and therefore is able to inspire us to move onward. Now I come to three other concepts which flow from the Upanishads, which are also very important in the present age. One is the concept of the world as a family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It's extraordinary. Thousands of years ago, when you couldn't move more than 10 or 12 miles a day on foot, our seers had this concept that in the final analysis, the whole world is a family. It is only now that we are moving towards globalization, that science and technology is giving us the instruments to become a global society. You can pick up a small machine, dial a few figures, and your voice will be ricocheted off a satellite and go down immediately halfway across the world. I mean, these were not available at that time. But the concept that the world ultimately, the human race, is a single family. Ayam nija paro veti gananam lagu chetasam udar charitanam tu vasudheva kutumbakam. This is mine, that is yours, is a small and narrow way of looking at things. For those of the higher consciousness, udar charitanam tu vasudha eva kutumbakam. The world itself is a family. And if we are ever going to move into a global society, because we have the technology, but we do not yet have the wisdom, we do not have the courage, we do not have the compassion to move into a global society. But if we ever do come to a global society, the watchword of that has to be Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is an insight of our peers thousands of years ago, which is becoming increasingly relevant now. Because now we have the technology not only to become a global society, but to destroy the global society many times over. There's enough fissionable material in the world now to destroy it 1,000 times. Each bomb today has the power of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. And there are thousands of such bombs on this planet. So unless we develop the wisdom and the understanding that we are ultimately a global, a human family, ultimately we will destroy ourselves. As you know, there are different scenarios. There's Arthur Koestler, the European philosopher, who holds that man is a creature programmed for self-destruction because of an engineering fault in the cortex, whereby the thinking and the feeling elements are not adequately joined. So while we know what is right in our mind, in our hearts, our minds, we cannot do what is right. There is this dichotomy. And therefore Koestler says that man is a creature, ultimately it is going to destroy itself. Sri Aurobindo, on the other hand, says that man is a creature destined for evolution. Although he does say, remember, that catastrophe may intervene. Those are very ominous words. But nonetheless, he says that ultimately the human race will evolve. So this is a different argument, but the point I'm making is that the concept of the world as a family, mind you, not only the world as a market is fine, but a market is essentially an exploitative structure, whereas a family is a supportive structure. So if the world is a family, then the sort of vast differences we have in economic status, in various other ways, millions of people living on the verge of starvation, on or below the poverty line, millions of them overeating and suffering as a result of that. This is no longer viable. If we are a family, we'll have to move ultimately towards a sane and just and harmonious society. So this concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, I feel, is a very significant concept, which is becoming increasingly relevant as we go on. The second concept is the concept of the essential unity of all religions. Ekam sat vipraha bahuda vadanti, as the Rig Veda says. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. I would urge you to contemplate upon this. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. This acceptance of multiple paths to the divine is at the essence of Hinduism. Who are we, tiny creatures on a speck of dust in this illimitable cosmos, to lay down that the divine can appear only at this time and in this form and at this place? It is prima facie unacceptable. There may be millions and millions of inhabited planets. How do we know in what manner the illimitable splendor of the divine has manifested itself? What I can say is, for me, my path is the best. But I cannot say that because you do not follow my path, you can be blown up or tortured or persecuted or massacred or whatever. Religion has a very mixed history let me say, much that is great and noble in human civilization, art, architecture, dance, music, spiritual codes, texts, can be traced back to one or other of the great religions of the world. But on the other hand, probably more people have been murdered and killed and tortured in the name of religion than in any other name. And the irony is that everybody thinks that its divine is very benevolent. I am Uvashikar Shiva Karpur Gauram Karunavataram, the incarnation of compassion. The Muslims start their prayers with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the merciful, the beneficent. The Christians believe that Jesus Christ mounted the cross in order to atone for the sins of humanity. And yet in the name of these religions and others, the most terrible things have happened. This is no longer acceptable in a global society. And this is the basis of the interfaith movement. The interfaith movement, as you perhaps know, can be said to have begun in 1893 with the first Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, where Swami Vivekananda, whose 150th birth anniversary we are celebrating in 014, appeared and made such a tremendous impact. From that day down to the present day, there have been lots of meetings, there have been lots of interfaith organizations. I myself head one worldwide, something called the Temple of Understanding. I've attended so many of these functions. There is a movement. There is a movement to try and bring people of different religions together. Not in the Shastras, not in order to prove which one is superior or otherwise, but in order to try and understand that all of these are multiple paths to the divine. This is something which I think is absolutely essential for the survival of the human race. Because even as I speak to you, fanaticism and fundamentalism are rearing their ugly heads around the world. And in the name of the divine, all sorts of atrocities are being committed. And all sorts of murders are being committed in the name of the benevolent divine, of the compassionate divine. This is no longer acceptable in the global society. So if that concept of the global society is there, the human family as a global society, then we have to accept that there are multiple paths to the divine. And that is clearly laid out in the Vedas and in the Upanishads. And that, to my mind, is one of the outstanding messages that we can get from the Vedanta. And the sixth and last point, to recapitulate, first of all, I talked of the all-pervasive Brahman, the Atman within each human being, and the fourfold path of joining them, yoga. Then I spoke of the concept of the whole human race as a family, Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The concept of multiple paths to the divine, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahudha Vadanti, and finally the concept of the welfare of all beings, Bahujana Sukhaya, Bahujana Hitaya. Our prayers were never only for ourselves. Sarvepi Sukhina Santu, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kashtit Dukha Bhagavad. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from pain. May all beings be able to live a healthy and meaningful life. And when we talk of all beings, it's not only human beings. That is why you will find in the Vedas, you will find hymns to the rivers, to the mountains, to the lakes, to the sun, to the moon. Because our seers realize that in the final analysis, if the natural environment is destroyed, the human race will also be destroyed. I was on the birth of the environmental movement in 1972. I was on the Indian delegation to the first UN conference on the human environment in Stockholm, and I watched the whole thing develop over the last 50 years. It has developed into a major movement. Unfortunately, the interfaith movement has not developed as well as that, but they are linked in a way, because if you respect all paths to the divine, you therefore respect all creatures. You don't kill whales just because you want them for dinner or just because you can make a lot of money out of it. There's so much negativity today, and therefore the welfare of all beings we have to stress. We need we need a coalition to offset the coalition of the fanaticism, of the gun runners, of the merchants who are in human trafficking, in drug trafficking, in all the negativities that are also surfacing today. We may have made tremendous technological progress. The negativities are there. If you just watch the films now, it's becoming impossible to watch any film because there's so much violence, there's so much horror. I cannot understand why horror films are made. This is one of the great mysteries of my life. Why should anybody go to a movie to be horrified? It doesn't make any sense. So there was a big thing. Somebody said, you can now see your nightmares with your eyes open. I mean, what sort of a civilization is this? If we are creating nightmares with our eyes open. And the violence now. You talk of life affirmation. Every time, what life affirmation will young people have when they grow up seeing hundreds of deaths, and they have these video games where you attack, how many people can you kill and how many bad guys can you put away. There are some very negative aspects today in human civilization. Let us remember that. And in order to offset that, we need a coalition of those who are committed to spiritual growth, who are committed to environmental protection, who are committed to brotherhood and fellowship of the various religions, who are committed to the conservation of all that is great and noble in human civilization, who are committed above all to move towards the inner light. And it is that movement towards the inner light that the Upanishads are constantly stressing, and that is really at the heart of all religions. What the Bible calls the light, that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. What the Sufis call the Noor Ruhani. What the Rishis say, Vedaham etam purusham mahantam aditya varanam tamasatparam. I have seen that great being shining like 1,000 suns beyond the darkness. That is what we have to look for. Francis Thompson has a marvelous poem in which he says, not where the wheeling systems darken and our benumbed conceiving soars, the drift of pinions would we hearken, beats at our own clay-shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places, turn but a stone and start a wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many-splendored thing. The many-splendid light of the Atman, of the Brahman, reflected in the Atman. The many-splendid light of divinity. We are missing that. We are growing, that is true. We are technologically, we are doing the most astounding things, but the wisdom is languishing. And I would submit that the Vedanta places before us an alternative model which stretches convergence in place of competition, holism in place of hedonism, which stresses a bringing together, a religare, religion, the very word religion from the Latin religare to religare, to bring together. And it is that soothing and uplifting message that is so urgently needed. That is the message that all the great seers have given, that Sri Aurobindo and the mother talked about. That is a message encapsulated in the Matri Mandir, in the great, the great inner chamber. The message of light, the message of love, the message of the Vedanta. Thank you.
Members of the governing board, the International Advisory Council, and all Aurovillians and friends from the ashram. As Prof Manoj said, after Dr Karan Singh has spoken, we all need a bit of silence to reflect on. I thank Dr Karan Singh for having readily agreed to come and speak to us today, and Prof Manoj for accepting our invitation to come and preside, and all of you for coming here, and the grace for getting us all together here. Thank you very much.